So we're live at the Hayek Global College channel. We're here with David Lesperance. We're going to talk about an article we published in the Hayek Business Review called Citizenship Wisdom. And we're going to start right after the countdown.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? This is a global transmission. Hayek will be live in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Enjoy the show.
All right, so here we're back here with David, and David is one of the world's leading international tax and immigration advisors. He's been a lawyer since the 90s and has been established in major law firms. And he himself has moved with his family to several different countries. And David, welcome to our talk today. Thank you for your contribution for Hayek Business Review and for being with us today.
Oh, pleasure to be here, Edson. I'm actually in Tulum, Mexico, in a hotel looking at this as a new location for the fourth move for my family. So I'm used to dealing not only with the tax and immigration, but like I say, you always got to sell this at the breakfast table. So,
right. And what's the deal with moving around? Why would you want to move around so much with your family?
Well, my wife and I divide our world into BC, before children, and AD, after delivery. So BC, we lived in downtown Toronto. You know, it was close to restaurants and offices and things. It was fantastic. AD, after delivery, there's no grass, there's no swings, you walk out traffic. And so we moved to Poland, which was where my wife was from. We thought, well, we'll be there for a little while. And I mean, I had done I've been traveling to the Far East, Middle East, and kind of globally traveling, and to move my prior family to the UK and things. But we moved to Poland because it was where my wife was originally from, but she'd lived in London, Dubai, Palm Beach. When I met her, she lived in New York. So I've been going, Hong Kong, Dubai, London. And so we moved there. And of course, as a British Prime Minister once said, events, dear boy, which is COVID, and then BC or AD, after delivery, for children, school years and things. So things tend to be divided there. So we're here in Tulum, and we've kind of decided that this is where we're going to move to, because I have a lot of clients in Silicon Valley. So now I have to stay till 9 o'clock at night, because it's 9 hours Central European time to Pacific Standard Time. So I won't have to stay up quite as late. And all my Far East clients, I don't deal with them. I deal with their advisors, who are generally in Europe or North America. So it's a lifestyle change. And also we're adventurous. We like living at different places.
So you have clients all over the world, which you're advising. And is this usually on the citizenship status? And what exactly are your clients looking for?
So it's families or individuals, and there are kind of two types of advisors, and they tend to be very siloed. So one would be on the immigration side, and unfortunately, a lot of them are commission-driven salespeople. So they'll sell you whatever is the highest commission for them, whether it's appropriate for the client, whether, what are the tax issues, it doesn't matter. When you tend to get tax advisors, they tend to be very domestic. So you can get a US tax advisor or UK or name your country. They tend to be very good at issues within their country, but the second you step across the border, they don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. Key to success, whether that's a young graduate who's saying, okay, I want to, expand my educational and career opportunities, or a well-established entrepreneur or retiree, the key is to have an integrated tax and immigration strategy. And also, one that is overlooked is family law. We have everybody talks about taxes. Well, taxes are a percentage of income. Divorce is a percentage of capital. So I have 11-year-old twins. So statistically, one of them is going to get divorced. I'll bet on my daughter because she already thinks the bad boys are cute. And so, there's two future conversations she could have. One is, honey, I know we're getting married in 2 weeks. I need you to get independent legal advice on this prenuptial. Or, honey, I'm sorry it didn't work out. I know you expect half. It's that SOB father of mine put it in a trust when I was 6 years old, so you get half of nothing. What's the easier conversation? And divorce is not a black swan event. Everybody who gets married thinks it's forever, and half of us are wrong.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things there. So for people hearing us, we're talking about having dual citizenship, right? What are the implications of having a dual citizenship, and why would you want to do that? And we mentioned there's family reasons, tax reasons, and maybe immigration, job opportunities, things to consider. And so if we, for example, I'm here in Brazil, and we have a lot of our students who want to move to the United States, right? It's a great country to be in. There's a lot of opportunities there. Some might be wanting to seek an American citizenship for professional reasons. But you also talk about having a backup plan in your article and in your advisor in general. And what is the importance of having two passports, in your opinion?
Sure. The technical term is multiple citizenships. I once had a client that had 8. Since most people just have 2, hence the kind of common term dual citizenship.
So you can have up to 8? That's news for me. I never heard of having 8.
As many as you qualify. It was wonderful to have him as a client, It had gone beyond kind of belt and suspenders to beyond kind of a hobby to a bit of a neurosis. So when I proposed number 9, he goes, "No, I think I got enough." That's too bad. It was great. He was my annuity client. But anyway, so if I think back to my ancestors who moved from France to Canada, that had a profound effect not only on their lives but on those of their children, and all of their descendants. So having multiple citizenships is both an opportunity and also a defensive strategy. It can be both. So I always have to preface this personal disclosure with, I swear my siblings and I didn't go out night clubbing looking for Europeans to dance with. But my sister married a Latvian, then a German. My brother married an Italian. I married a Scotswoman, then a Pole. And my younger sister married an Irishman. So I've been doing lineage citizenship since before I got called to the bar in 1990.
Wow.
So one of the things for people in Brazil and kind of the Americas, that they were immigration destination countries during the 19th and 20th century. So one of the things that we often tell clients to look at is, do you have claim to some type of, in Brazil there's lots of Italians and Poles and different groups. Do you have claim to one of those lineage citizenships? If you happen to have that, you can say, well, I don't want to move to Italy. No. You have to understand, if you're a citizen of any EU country, you have the right to live, work, and study in 27 different countries. So if you have that heritage, it's worth pursuing that, because it'll not only impact your life, but again, your children and grandchildren and so on. So that's something worth looking at. The United States, you need to understand where people are at different stages of their life. So if you're a young person, you're looking at continuing your education or beginning your career, then the next stage is you'll may fall in love and have married and have little Edsons and so far. Hopefully they will then go on and graduate from somewhere and go on their own, and then you'll be in a retirement stage. And likewise, your career will have different stages, from kind of I'm just out, I'm learning my craft, or starting my business, to I've been very successful and taxes are now a big issue. So you need to look at all those things. So the United States it is a wonderful place for education. It's a wonderful place to begin certain careers. But once you become very successful, it's also an enormous tax burden. So I have clients
Right.
in and leaving the US. And the US is unique in that it has citizenship-based taxation. So if you're, for example, we'll use a Brazilian example, Eduardo Saverin
Mm-hmm.
of Facebook was a Brazilian naturalized in the United States. You know, his family moved when he was a teenager, was a US citizen, went to Harvard, had a roommate named Zuckerman. They started a little company called The Facebook at that point, and it was hugely successful. He was then looking at, as a very young person, we're seeing this with not only Silicon Valley founders, but people who are into crypto. They're younger, where they hit that wealth stage, not when they're in their 50s or 60s, but they're hitting it when they're in their 20s and 30s. For those people, all of a sudden, the United States is a burden. Tax-wise, significant, capital gains, income, estate tax, gift taxes. And so you need to kind of understand where you're at and to have a flexible strategy that will take advantage of the various stages you will be going into in the future. The U.S. And the current administration in the United States, again, I was once called by somebody close to me that I look at the world like Mr. Spock from Star Trek. She thought it was without emotion. I thought it was untrue, but aspirational, that I looked at the world logically and as it really is, not how I wish it was, how I
Right.
wish it was. So, the situation in the United States right now, from an educational point of view, is there is a great amount of uncertainty. I mean, the current administration is using students as kind of the whipping boy to go after institutions like Harvard, etc. So one of the big things that we're seeing is people who would have gone to the United States for education say, well, that's a lot of money for tuition, and I don't know whether the administration is going to kind of pull the rug out from under all foreign students. So maybe I'll look at alternatives. And again, there's some smart choices you can make. So you could, for example, go to a Canadian university, get Canadian permanent residence after graduating, become a citizen, and go and work your time in the United States under the trade agreement. So there's all kinds of kind of alternative ways of accomplishing their goals. But understand kind of where you're at, where your next stage is, and where you're going to be in the future. So giving yourself kind of maximum optionality.
What are the countries that you believe are the best alternatives to become a citizen for opportunities or tax purposes?
So when you're looking at another jurisdiction, when we're talking about citizenship, you need to look at a number of different factors. So does that country allow multiple citizenships? So Brazil does, United States do, many countries do, other countries do not. So for example, the Netherlands says if you become naturalized here, you must give up all your existing citizenships. Same thing with, for example, Singapore, where Eduardo Saverin went to.
So they don't allow another, not even another citizenship. So it's
Right.
only, if you're Singaporean, you're only Singaporean.
Correct. So if you are Singaporean and then you become naturalized in another country, you lose your Singaporean citizenship. And likewise, if you are a foreigner who wants to become naturalized in Singapore, they make you give up your citizenship.
I see.
So dual citizenship tends to fall into kind of three types. Some are countries which say if we do not allow dual citizenship. So for example, Singapore and India fit into that category. India says if you become naturalized in a foreign country, you lose your Indian citizenship. You can get something called Indian citizenship overseas and stuff, but it's not full Indian citizenship. Some countries say, well, we will allow dual citizenship if you ask us, your permission first. So Germany and South Africa were the classic examples, although they just changed their laws last year. And then there are others that say you don't have to ask anything. In fact, we'll allow multiple citizenships just as a course. So dual citizenship is an issue. Citizenship-based taxation is something to consider.
What does that mean?
So, for example, most countries say if you live here, according to whatever, maybe a day count or a closer connections test, you'll pay taxes here. But
even if you don't get income from that country, you will pay taxes.
Well, again, you have to look at, first off, who is a taxpayer. So they'll say, okay, if you live here, you're a taxpayer. Then you look at what they tax. Is it territorial, just domestic, or are they looking at global taxation? So the first question is, who is a taxpayer? The United States says, if you are a U.S. citizen, even if you've never stepped foot in the United States, you may have got that citizenship through a parent, or you, for example, I grew up in a border city, Windsor, Detroit. I'm a child of the auto industry. It's only a kilometer across the river. Mm-hmm. What was quite common back in the day was when mothers would feel the contractions, they'd run over to the United States and have what they now call anchor babies. I'm the third child, so when my mother got pregnant with me, the doctor said my parents were Rh blood incompatible, which meant I needed blood transfusions. So the doctor said, don't be screwing around driving across the bridge. You have that kid in Canada. So the only reason I didn't have a U.S. citizenship is because my parents had incompatible blood, which turned out to be a good thing later on, because I didn't have citizenship-based taxation. But older brother and sister, for example, even though they only lived in the United States for a week, because they used to let you stay for a week in those days, they are U.S. persons for their whole lives. My brother gave up his citizenship, and don't worry, Edson, I gave him a good friends and family rate. My sister never did. So every year, my sister has to not only file Canadian tax, but she has to file U.S. tax because she's a citizen. U.S. is unique in this. They keep trotting out Eritrea, but the Eritrea, which is a small country in East Africa, just above Ethiopia, they don't have an IRS. They don't have FATCA. They don't have, U.S. The Eritrean, I think it's dinare, is not, like the U.S. dollar, a global currency. So the U.S. owns it. They have they're really the only ones with citizenship-based taxation. And so that's one of the things. Another is military service. So, for example, if you're Jewish, under the law of return, you have the right to take out Israeli citizenship, but there's mandatory military service for men and women.
Independently of age. Like if you're 40 and you get
what's happened, and correct me, those out there who are more familiar with it than me, but I believe it's from 18 to 25, and then after you are in reserves.
Okay.
So, and just to show you kind of what the world is like, I had a lot of Israeli tech clients. I particularly have a lot of clients in the tech industry. And Israel, for those who are familiar with the term of startup nation, they are very powerful in the tech industry, and a lot of those founders met during the time in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. They then went on to start a company. I had clients who were out in the streets protesting against Netanyahu before October 7th, and who were engaging me. And in fact, we were doing so many of them, I co-authored a piece for Bloomberg Tax on personal and corporate moves from Israel to the United States, the immigration and tax issues. October 7th happened. All of those founders were called to, they were in the reserves. So all of a sudden they were on the front line somewhere. At the time I was working in a co-working space in Poland, but the chap next to me was a Jewish fellow from Kiev who had fled the Ukraine and was working there. He was the tech lead for an Israeli defense company. All of a sudden, he said, 2 out of the 3 founders are gone. I'm on the board. He said, Dave, they're asking me about HR issues and Series B funding. I'm a tech guy. I don't know any of this stuff. So, so that's one of the considerations you had. And I've got some clients who say, look, I'm Jewish. I was born and raised in Israel. I believe in the state of Israel, but I don't want to raise my children in a war zone. And I still don't like Netanyahu after October 7th. So, these are people who are looking to diversify. And interestingly, Israel, a lot of Israelis will, of course, it was formed in 1947. So a lot of them would have been from Europeans. So there are people who have claims to Polish or Hungarian or German or Austrian. And then, so there's not only normal lineage programs, you get kind of all kinds of little quirks, like Portugal and Spain brought in a program specifically for Sephardic Jews as opposed to Ashkenazi Jews, whose family fled as a result of the Spanish Inquisition. Now we're going back, many centuries into the 1400s. Spain has closed that program. Portugal has effectively closed that program, but Austria and Germany have special programs for descendants of those who lost their German or Austrian citizenship as a result of the Nuremberg laws brought in by the Nazis, or lost their lives as a result of the Holocaust, or who were forced to leave, and things. So, when people say, well, I don't want to go back to Austria, again, like your Italian, Brazilian, you don't have to go and live in Austria. You don't have to go live in Italy. You've got 27 different choices.
Right. As a parenthesis there, I just got my Italian citizenship like a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And it was my great grandmother who was Italian. After her, nobody even spoke Italian or had anything to do with Italy, but we happened to get the citizenship. And now even my kids have Italian passports.
Exactly. So, and one of the things, and that's a great question. Italy just in the last few months has changed the rules. So Italy was one of the most generous. They would go back, depending on where they were coming from in Italy, to Garibaldi. Now they have restricted it to grandparents. So you would not be eligible today.
Right.
Another example, I mentioned my younger sister married an Irishman. My brother who married the Italian, all his kids got their Italian citizenships and did, gap years and worked. And it was prior to Brexit, so they worked in the UK also. I had a niece that lived in Brussels for 10 years on her Italian passport. My younger sister never got around to doing it. Her kids were younger. If she had applied at the same time as the spouse of an Irish citizen, she would have been entitled to Irish citizenship, but they changed the rules so that by the time she got around to it, her husband and kids all have Irish passports. She would be entitled to a shorter naturalization period if she picked up and moved, and Irish husband could sponsor her under the family class for residence, what we'll call junior membership in the club. But if she wants senior membership in the club, citizenship, then she would have to wait 3 years. Normal is 5 years, but if you're the spouse of an Irish citizen. So you get lots of people who say, well, my uncle looked into it 20 years ago and the Hungarians said no. Well, first off, there isn't the Borg, again, another Star Trek reference. But you didn't talk to Hungary. You talked to somebody who worked at a Hungarian embassy or consulate who may or may not have been asked the right question, who may or may not have giving your uncle the right answer, and the laws may very well have changed. Right. So it's worth kind of looking into it. And whenever we're looking into lineage citizenships, kind of think of it as a steeplechase. So the first one is, do you theoretically qualify? So we get the facts. If yes, then we go to the second one, which is, can we get the documentation to prove it to satisfactory to that government? If yes, then you do the application. But if you don't clear the first two hurdles, it's, you would stop it. So if you were talking to me a year ago, I would say, yes, Edson, apply for your Italian passport. If you're talking to me today, I'd say, I'm sorry, you don't clear the first hurdle.
Right. And for people listening to us right now, it's important that you take a look at it early before eventual laws change, right?
Yeah.
And it happened to me. It happened to be my aunt. She started looking into it, and she was able to prove the lineage and went through all the process. And we went to my side of the family as well, and we just went through it. And what you said is important because there's a lot of misinformation when people start looking by this for these types of issues themselves. Because sometimes you talk to either someone that is working for the embassy or working at an agency, a state agency, or even advisors that might not know exactly what they're doing and might not get the right information. Right? Do you see a lot of misinformation this type of work?
Yeah, a huge amount. I mean, I know a lot of this stuff, but we always engage local counsel for a couple reasons. Number one, to confirm that the assessment is done properly and that there hasn't been some law passed, 2 months ago that changed things. We bring in researchers. So depending on the country, there will be specific researchers. If clients either have all this documentation because somebody kept it, or we need to look up some particular documentation and we get the right researchers, and there's all kinds of quirks there. So for example, again, I live currently in Poland with a Polish wife. I happen to do a lot of Polish lineage citizenships, again with Polish counsel, because that was a big emigration country during the 19th and 20th centuries, and they're quite generous like the Italians were in granting it. And you get little quirks. For example, I'll go into a bit of history. So at the end of the Second World War, there was something called the Warsaw Uprising, where the Russians were on one side of the Vistula River waiting for the Germans to overturn the Poles who were in a resistance. So if you think of the city of Warsaw as a pie divided into 6 sections, the records for 3 of those sections were destroyed. However, if you're Jewish, the rabbis moved all the records for Jews to a completely different city. So you may be in one of the destroyed sectors, but because of some quirk, those records may have been moved elsewhere. Well, again, that's pretty specialist work. So again, we always bring in the local professionals to confirm, the first hurdle, and then the second hurdle, and then we work with and engage those specialists again if we get to the actual applications. And like your aunt, there tends to be the immigrant, and from there's a hub of, depending how far back. If you're looking at a grandparent, I mean, that's a big fat tree. So if you've got, between cousins and uncles and aunts, you've got 15 applications. Well, there's an economy of scale to doing that. So it's going to cost each individual significantly less than if you had one person straight from an immigrant.
Right. Very interesting. And what are there risks for renouncing a certain citizenship? So, for example, take the case of United States, right? So we had the famous case of Eduardo Saverin renouncing his U.S. citizenship. Is there any risks of being denied entry in the United States or receiving any type of sanction because of renouncing citizenships in the United States or other countries?
Sure. So, and again, by giving you a little bit of history, I'll clarify some common misinformation. So I did my first U.S. expatriation in 1990. So I've been doing this for 35 years. There's certain tax ramifications from 1990 to 2008, something called the HART Act, the Heroes Earnings Act. It's called the HART Act. Before that, there was something called the 10-year rule. If you gave up your U.S. citizenship, you continue to be taxed for 10 years on only your U.S. source and U.S. situs, U.S. located property, that's situs. That was easy for us to plan around. Basically, if you continued to have U.S. source and U.S. situs, we either sold it or mortgaged the crap out of it and took all the proceeds out. Simple enough. 2008, currently leader of the opposition in the Senate, Charles Schumer, brought in the HART Act, and it went to what's called a mark to market, which is when you leave, if you are what's called a covered expatriate, and I'll talk about that in a moment, you are deemed to have sold your worldwide assets and to trigger a capital gains tax and to trigger whatever the federal tax is. The top rate is 23.8%. So let's look at Eduardo Saverin. Prior to the IPO, in fact, a year, 14 months prior to the IPO, he gave up his citizenship. He triggered an exit tax, a deemed disposition. So 23.8% times what? Well, if we assume his cost basis was $1, because he's a founder, and what were those shares worth? Well, it wasn't an IPO. If it had already done an IPO, fire up the Bloomberg and tell us what it closed at yesterday. But it wasn't. It was still private. It was still, there's discounting opportunities, et cetera. So it was significantly lower amount. He then expatriates. The sequence of this, and there'll be an article coming out in the FT in a day or two that I was just quoted on explaining the list of expatriates. And those who want to, you can go to my website, and there's a white paper for those who want to delve into it. But basically, Eduardo Saverin and Charles Schumer, it came out right about the time of the IPO that he had expatriated 14 months before and paid exactly the tax that Charles Schumer had said he was supposed to pay. Charles Schumer, he's unfriended, he's evaded this much tax, quoting the IPO number. Well, he didn't leave at that point. He left before,
right,
and stuff. So, he's not the first disingenuous politician, and won't be the last. But if you look at that, so do you trigger an exit tax, which we call it 877A exit tax, or is there an inheritance tax? So, well, that depends on whether you are what's called a covered expatriate. So a covered expatriate is somebody who's worth more than $2 million in worldwide assets. Obviously, Eduardo Saverin was, but the list doesn't say whether you're worth $2 million or $2 billion. It's just, do you trigger that threshold? Do you have a certain amount of federal tax liability in the previous 5 years? That number keeps going up with inflation. It's right now 197,000. Well, most people who have that type of federal tax liability tend to be over the 2 million anyway. Or the last part is, you need to be able to certify, and if you don't, you're a covered expatriate, certify your U.S. tax compliance for the previous 5 years. If you give up your citizenship and you trigger one of these, are section form 8854 for those who are keen to Google it, you'll see all this, or you can read again the white paper on my page. But it also affects long-term green card holders. So let me bring it to the current. So what's a long-term green card holder? Somebody who's held that status for 8 out of the last 15 years. Well, when you get your green card, you're issued something called a permanent resident card, which is valid for 10 years. So some people may go work for some company in the United States after a certain number of years, say, yeah, I'm going back to my home country, or I'm moving on to the next place, and they let their permanent resident card expire. I'm not a green card holder anymore. Well, you're a U.S. taxpayer if you're a citizen, green card holder, you spend too much time in the United States. And they say, well, I'm not a green card holder anymore. They tell their accountant they don't file their returns. In 2025, they show up in Miami or JFK. The border officials now are, wound up with Trump, and they're examining and going, Edson, yeah, I see you had a green card here. Yeah, I gave that up years ago and stuff. It's like, well, no, you're still a green card holder. Just as you're a Brazilian, you're still a Brazilian when your passport expires. You're still a green card holder if your permanent resident card expires. Oh, okay. And again, I was once upon a time going through law school before I either saw the light or went to the dark side and got called to the bar. I was the guy at the border they would meet. And so I'd say, well, Edson, we got 2 choices here. I can write you up. And administratively, they're going to find you abandoned your U.S. citizenship. And, I'm going for lunch in 10 minutes. I really don't want to write you up. Or here's a choice. You can voluntarily relinquish your green card status right now. Here's pick up a pen and sign this little, I-407 form. Sign it right here, and I'll let you in as a visitor. And if I write you up, I'm going to put you back on a plane to Rio or Sao Paulo until this administrative thing goes. Of course, you want to go to whatever you traveled to Miami or JFK to, so give me a pen. and you
Right.
sign it. You've just given up your long-term green card. Do you have more than 2 million? No. Do you have the tax liability? No. But you can't certify. So you're a covered expatriate. You're deemed to have sold on a worldwide basis all of your assets. And if you leave, if any of your heirs, if you give a gift or a bequest, upon your death to any U.S. person, they're going to pay a 40% tax. So giving your U.S. citizenship is a wonderful tax plan, but you need to make sure that you do it right. You asked a question about, can I get back in? Well, in 1996, there was a major, it was the last time the U.S. did a major kind of revamp of their immigration law, the 1996 bill. And they threw in there something that's called the Reed Amendment, which was an attempt to stop people who left from coming back in. The problem was, again, 1996, before 9/11, before Homeland Security existed, the border officials were under the Attorney General of the United States, who, this is Clinton administration, was a tall Texan named Janet Reno. And she said, oh, it's not constitutional. Well, they threw it in, and for those who may know, the little America's Rock thing, 3 readings of the House, 3 readings of the Senate, president signs it, bill becomes law. That happened, but they never passed enabling regulations. Why? Because it was unenforceable and unconstitutional. Well, since then, U.S. governments are every 2 years. There's been many of them since 1996. We're almost coming up on 30 years, and they've never passed it. There was a couple of attempts to enforce it that failed miserably. I was actually called in on, but those cases died in the 1990s. So there isn't a bar. However, when you're a U.S. citizen, you have a right to enter the United States. Mm-hmm. You may be Sam Bankman-Fried and arrested 5 feet after you step into the United States, but you have a right to enter. When you're not an American, whether you're somebody under a U.S. visa waiver program like an Italian, or somebody who has visa-free travel like a Canadian, you don't have a right to enter, or you're somebody who needs a visa. You just have the ability to knock on the door, and then the port of entry officials will then decide whether to, and they'll apply the normal criteria. So in all those 35 years I've been doing, I've never had a client refused entry. But they need to understand, under the Trump administration, for example, one of the kind of things that the sales guys will tell you is they'll sell you some Caribbean citizenship in Dominica or St. Kitts or whatever. Well, those are on a list now. It's making it difficult to get a visa, because all those countries need a visa, and will harass you at the border. So I've got clients who, if it financially makes sense for them to expatriate, are spending money on European passports, which are, under the U.S. visa waiver program. So it is very, very involved, and this is, levels beyond what the salesperson. I mean, there's a couple of groups, but if you look at kind of their directors, what were they selling? What were they doing 5 years ago? Well, they were selling insurance or water beds.
Right.
They're global experts. Well, all due respect.
So
I'm not super smart, but I've been doing this for 35 years.
Right. So what I'm getting from this is, if you're renouncing your U.S. citizenship,
or relinquishing your green card,
or relinquishing your green card, you most probably will be able to get a visa to get into the United States as a citizen of another country, unless
again, you want to make sure that's part of that before you do this. You want to make sure you're properly advised as what's the situation, what are the steps, what are the risks,
right.
How do you mitigate? Yeah,
of course. And unless, of course, you're involved with any political issue that is in the radar of the current or future administrations, you probably shouldn't have a problem, right? I'm thinking about like political cases where recently some judges of our Supreme Court in Brazil were refused of getting the American visa. So unless there's political issues like that, you probably should be in a safe zone of trying to get a visa in the future.
Well, and you also have to recognize that the current administration will change in January of 2029. So, you know, and visa issues kind of come and go and change. For example, Argentina just announced that Melee is going to bring in a new citizenship by investment program. At the same time, they're also applying to be under the U.S. visa waiver program. So they've passed the laws to allow. We're still waiting for the details, but it looks like it's a 500,000 U.S. investment in some business targeted industry that he wants to do that. And if you've got a U.S. visa waiver program, and so there's a whole bunch of kind of little quirks. So, for example, I have clients who move into Uruguay. Well, if you're a Mercosur citizen, you get faster processing, less physical presence time in order to maintain that residence and naturalize in Uruguay. So you have to understand all the little elements and quirks, which are beyond, you know, with all due respect, are beyond the guy who was selling waterbeds 3 years ago.
Right. And that's the importance of not planning this on your own and having professionals do this for you, right?
Yeah, you want to make sure you take advantage of the opportunities that you have. You want to make sure you don't step on any financial landmines. And the key is to have an integrated plan. And, you know, you also want to be able to you know, sell this at the breakfast table. So I'll give you an example of a plan that, so Puerto Rico has something called Act 60, which is something that is great for Americans, that for fund managers, for example, they can move there and go on Act 60 and have tremendous tax savings. The problem is it's a big move from the island of Manhattan to the island of Puerto Rico. So, and it's usually guys who are the fund managers. So they'll come and they're loving it. And they come home and their spouse says, I hate this place. The power keeps going out. There's hurricanes. I don't speak Spanish. I can't get anything done, et cetera, et cetera. But don't worry about me. Go talk to little Johnny. And they go down the hall. Johnny, what's the problem? He goes, I hate this place. I was the captain of my tennis team back in my prep school in Manhattan. And here I'm the last guy to get picked because I haven't been kicking a ball around since I was 3 years old. And I don't know what they're saying because they're saying it in Spanish, but I hate this place. Right. And so it doesn't work at the breakfast table. And they either properly leave the United States tax system by expatriating with all the issues that were involved. They move back to the United States, and they may move from a high tax jurisdiction like New York City to Florida. And then you get people who think they're, you know, oh, I'm going to try to cheat the system. So I've had clients who've said, well, they go, oh, well, I fly privately. We go, well, yeah, so did everybody on Epstein's Lolita Express. They keep records.
Right.
No. I've got a friend of mine. These are all real things people have told me. Oh, I've got a friend of mine who owns a boat. He'll drop me off in Key Largo, and a frat buddy of mine bought a car, and I'll drive. And it's like, okay, James Bond, but you got one of these, right? That's pinging off a tower every few seconds. Yeah. Oh no, I got burner phones. Okay, Jason Bourne, let's continue on. Okay, so you don't use credit card, to use cash on the drive all the way up to New York City. Great. Right. And you're in some bodega in the East Side, and I go, Edson, what are you doing here in New York? I thought you were in Puerto Rico. You go, just visiting. And I'm thinking, I never really liked Edson that much. And there's a 40% whistleblower award. And so, so play it right. And then I've got others. Now it's like crypto or influencers. So there's a famous influencer who anybody who knows who influencers are that went to Puerto Rico can figure out who this is. Well, one of the requirements of Act 60 is that you spend 6 months of the year physically in Puerto Rico. Well, you only have to fire up this guy's Instagram to say, oh, okay, here I got you here and here and here and here. I haven't even left my home office working for the IRS, and I figured out you haven't complied with Act 60. Therefore, you're not entitled to the tax benefit. Therefore, we're going to audit you and charge you with tax evasion.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of things to consider, and we probably need to do a very detailed study before.
Well, and don't, so when crypto came on, I've heard So I had lots of clients, who would say, Dave, this expatriation is really complicated and stuff, and very expensive. I met some UBS banker at Art Basel, Miami. I'm just going to open up an account in Miami, which worked till it stopped working in 2005 or 2005 when Brad Birkenfeld handed a USB key with all their names, and that blew up. Then when crypto came, I thought, yeah, I've seen this movie before. Oh, it's perfect tax haven. It's literally a public ledger. So as soon as they identify that wallet belongs to Edson, they've got everything.
Right.
Okay, well, how will they know? Well, Edson, you can have, 1,000 Bitcoin, but if you want to pay for this month's rent or mortgage payment, you got to cash it in somehow. And which means that they're going to identify. And if you've got, I've heard of mixers and Monera, and every one of these, I kind of go, well, yeah, it'll work. Oh, you got a mixer? That's great. Right until they arrest the guy who owns the mixer, who, to lower his sentence, will hand over all your, Edson, here we go. You use this mixer. And you have to understand, in tax, you are liable until you prove you're not liable.
Yeah, it goes back to a quote. We're only sure of two things in life: death and taxes, right?
Yeah. I can't do anything about death. It's an event certain with an uncertain event date, but I can help you on taxes.
Right. So, David, just for us to close off here, we talked about a lot of interesting things on if people are looking to diversify their citizenship or renounce citizenships. And this is for people who want to be professionals who can work and live in different countries, right? And just to close off with the last question, which goes a lot into what Hayek Global is doing, why do you believe it's important as a young person to seek to become an international professional and not just someone who lives in a certain country?
Well, it's because you get opportunities, and you have a different, a wider perspective than your peers. So, for example, everybody kind of grows up somewhere, and if they think of the people that they went to high school with, most of them, born, lived, worked, and died within 15 kilometers of the same spot. When you kind of move internationally and you start thinking in different currencies, you start thinking in different time zones, you start thinking in different business cultures and investment opportunities, it widens your perspective and makes you much more valuable. So, for example, let's say you're going to be an accountant. Well, there's lots of domestic accountants and whatever accountant, but if you're somebody who can deal either on the personal or business side, with cross-border issues, you're very valuable. If you're somebody who got that Italian citizenship and PwC wants to offer you a job in Brussels, you can get on a plane and go. Whereas your classmate who doesn't have that EU country citizenship has got to go through all the Belgian immigration. Well, you're much more employable. I have footballers, South American footballers, who we get lineage citizenships for because Premier League clubs don't need to use their country quotas for them. So their Argentinian or Brazilian counterpart who doesn't have that, well, they've more limited market. Whereas if you've got that Italian passport, you can go play for Barca or AC Milan or whoever you're going to play for, and they don't need to use their foreigner quota because you're an EU national. And so, those types of things are very important, and people need to think about their stages of where they are in life and where they intend to go, and having multiple citizenships, especially in, I'm now going to be organizing one of the things for my own family. We've got a NAFTA passport, we've got Canadian passports, we've got an EU passport, we're going to get a Mercosur passport, but the only other one we could get is New Zealand, Australia, and stuff. That may be in the future, but that gives my children a great amount of educational and career opportunities.
Fantastic. David, thank you so much for the conversation today.
Pleasure.
I learned a lot. Would you like to just let us know how people can get in touch with you if they ever want to talk to you?
Sure. So the spelling of the name for the Spanish or Italian speakers out there, it means the hope, of course, Esperanto, Lesperance, the hope. And my father was Robert, so my father, for those of you who remember who Bob Hope was, he was Robert the Hope. Anyway, they can go to my website, Lesperance Associates. I'd also suggest that they follow or connect with me on LinkedIn. I do posts every day there. I've got a blog that they can look at. I'm in media posts kind of constantly. So if they follow me on LinkedIn, they'll see kind of, oh, he's, in the New York Times or the FT or, whatever. And they can follow. And so I try to be insightful and give people hints. And if anybody wants to kind of check out, are you entitled to a lineage citizenship or some thoughts or advice, they can contact me to do consultations. So,
all right. Thank you very much again, David.
It was a pleasure.